To our first discussion now, the Nigerian economy has been classified as one of the most volatile economies in the world. Yes, that's due to its high dependence on oil revenue, as economic instability is witnessed yearly through rising inflation, massive unemployment, low output, and dwindling foreign reserves that result to unstable exchange rates, and the country's economic potential is constrained by many structural issues, including inadequate infrastructure, tariff and non-tariff barriers to trade obstacles to investments, lack of confidence in currency valuation, limited foreign exchange capacity, and worsening insecurity, which is posing a threat to the growth of foreign direct investment into the country. Despite the expected growth of 1.8% in 2021, there is high uncertainty about the outlook, as the recovery will be driven by the rise in oil exports and in domestic demand. However, Nigeria's recovery is expected to underperform those of other oil producers, and an unexpected shock to oil prices could threaten the modest growth projected. Economic analysts say policy adjustments and reforms by fiscal and monetary authorities designed to shift the country from its dependence on oil and to diversify the economy towards private sector-led growth will set Nigeria on a more sustainable path to recovery. To discuss this and other burning issues this holiday, I have joining me live via Skype. He is the Chief Consultant at B. Adedikpe Associates Limited, Dr. Biodun Adedikpe. Good afternoon, Dr. Adedikpe. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Tolu, for having me. Good afternoon.
Dr. Adedikpe, there's a lot to talk about, but let me start this way. Pricing of items to be threatened from food, transportation, and other services, if going by the hints that the price of fuel might go high if subsidy is removed without social cushion or alternative energy. Now, this is a major threat to inflation reversal. What do you make of our economic space at this time? Inflation declining, but the reality is that the prices of goods and services remain on the high side.
Yeah, thank you so very much for that. And that is a very good point to start our conversation. See, generally, there is a misunderstanding of inflation as a concept. That prices are going up does not translate into inflation rate, going up. Inflation rate measures the rate at which prices change, which means, for example, if the price of an item was 100 naira 6 months ago, then 3 months ago it went to 150 naira, and then another 3 months after, it went up by the same margin of 50 naira, which means it's now 200 naira, which means we have had price changes twice by 50 naira. Now, the way inflation is computed as that rate is that you look at the last rate, the last price, and compare with the current one. So by all means, if you take 150 naira and compare with 100, that will give you 50% increase in price. But by the time you compare 200 with 150 naira, you will get a lower increase in price, which comes to about 33%. In which case, an analyst like me, an economics professional, will say that inflation rate has dropped from 50% to 33%. So most of our analysts, in fact, I will say here with every sense of responsibility, are illiterate economists. When you say someone is an illiterate economist, that means he or she doesn't fully understand the concept and is misinforming the public in interpreting what is happening. So the prices are going up is not the same as saying inflation rate is going up. What we measure in inflation rate is by how much has the price gone up compared to where it was. So I want people to understand that, so that when you see data published by National Bureau of Statistics that indicates that inflation rate is dropping in Nigeria, the reference is to the fact that prices are still rising, but they are not rising at the same rate they were previously. So I want us to settle that. But nonetheless, inflation has two interpretative dimensions. The first is that if the rate of inflation is going up, like you said, that is one of the four measures, or what we call the misery index, which measures the extent to which people are miserable within an economic space. So if inflation rate is going up persistently, and the unemployment rate is also rising, like you said, and at the same time, lending rate maximum is also rising, The combination of those three, put side by side with your GDP growth rate, we measure the index. That's what goes to measure your misery index, okay? Which means there is an interest in the government introducing policies, whether monetary or fiscal, that will make inflation rates to drop, okay? But on the other hand, for producers also are motivated to go back into the factory and produce more when the price per unit of their product is rising, which means there's a motivational aspect to inflation on the one hand, and there's also the other side that measures the cost of living, which affects the standard of living. So there's a fine balance that needs to be achieved in doing that, and the bottom line of it is producing more, whether in terms of agricultural produce or in terms of manufacturers. You need to produce more of what people consume. So if we produce more, then we have chances of caging inflation, and that starts from food, like you rightly said. So let me stop it there so that we can take more dimensions to this conversation.
All right, it's a very beautiful way to start letting us understand what all of this means. Now, another aspect that is worrisome has been the calls for improved debt management strategy, for debt thresholds to be calculated better. The Minister of Finance has called to use the debt to GDP ratio, which has been that argument that we are yet to get to that threshold and all of that. Dr. Adedipe, what do you think about the management of Nigeria's debt at the moment? It's getting scary, and we are even going for more.
So very much for that. Now, there are several dimensions also in terms of interpreting the sovereign debt. Now, one aspect is what the minister wants us to give attention to, which is the debt GDP ratio. Yes, if you look at that ratio alone as a standalone, it will more or less want to recommend to you to borrow more. But at the same time, we ask about other questions that relate to sovereign debt. The first is how it pairs down into foreign loan and domestic. So in which case, you'll be talking about that portion that is foreign, where we are also vulnerable to exchange rate volatility. The other side to it is the cost, in which case, at what average cost is this, debt coming to us as a nation? In which case, you take, for example, if we take the foreign debts that we have, multilateral, bilateral, and of course, a couple of others within the mix. Now, what is the weighted average cost of these borrowed funds on the one hand? Then we look at the portion borrowed locally, that's domestic debt, and again ask ourselves, what is the weighted average cost of that? Now, if you look at that as of today, it is more expensive to borrow locally than borrow offshore. Now, but if you now bring in the issue of exchange rate volatility, they'll begin to look at the future, let's say the next 5 to 10 years. In fact, look at the duration of those borrowed funds, and then ask yourself, how is the Naira exchange value likely to play out in terms of managing the economy and in terms of dealing with the various items in the external sector? That will give us some concern. Then you come to the dimension of what we use the money to do. If we strictly borrow for projects, yes, the rational thing for an economy is to say that is in the right direction. But the question will also be, for which projects? Are there projects that government should really consider as commercially viable and therefore look for private partners to handle under the PPP model? In which case, government doesn't need to borrow directly for that, but actually go into a public-private partnership agreement that will enable a private investor borrow to do that, and then bring in the discipline of execution that is known with the private sector, and deliver that also at a what we call, value for money price, because that's also an issue in our space. So if we are able to bring all this into the crucible, then certainly we'll be worried to some extent, and now begin to ask ourselves what needs to change. So in my own view, it is not about government actually borrowing for all the projects because money is available to borrow. So we should ask ourselves, if government must borrow, let it be for projects that are not bankable and therefore can be supported over time in terms of repayment of the loan and servicing from a government revenue. So that's the way I will look at this. I will say therefore that going forward, I think we should be more circumspect in terms of borrowing. And as God says, that the project we want to borrow for, is it really a project that is bankable or not bankable? If the project is bankable, my advice to our government is that look for a private partner that has a track record of, excellent project execution, and then go into an agreement with them to build, to own, to operate, and then transfer to the government over time. We call that the boot, agreement structure or PPP. Government should explore that rather than borrowing for every project. That's my opinion on this.
Now, another thing that I would like us to talk about, because having you talk about the economy, it's really, really a privilege. Now, dwindling value of the naira, which reflects the state of the economy versus policy direction for government ahead of the MPC meeting, which should hold on the 25th to 26th of this month, I guess. What are your expectations, and considering this fact that the naira continues to dwindle?
Surprised if the MPC takes a position of contraction, and that is to introduce policies that will bring a contraction there. And my reasons are very simple. Now, if you look at our foreign trade statistics, the latest official data available is for the first quarter of 2021. Now, if you look at the data and compare exports to our total foreign trade, exports accounted for less than 30%. In fact, to be specific, 29.8%, because imports accounted for 70.2% of our foreign trade. And that pattern has been there since first quarter of 2020, which means consecutively in the last 5 quarters, Nigeria has been importing more than we're exporting. Okay? So which of course is where the pressure on the exchange value of the naira comes from, because again, our foreign reserves have been dwindling. And in fact, where we are now, based on the latest check I made this morning, which reflects the position as at the 16th of July 2021. Now, if we compare that with the average monthly import bill of Nigeria, about $5.568 billion every month, using the first quarter data of this year. If you divide that into our foreign, that is external reserves, you will get 5.9 months cover of our import bills. Ideally, we should have minimum cover of 6 months. Talking about exchange rate management now from central banking perspective, which means then that if we want to stabilize the exchange value of the naira, we should have not less than 6 months of import cover. That's on the one side. But also we know by the recommendations of IMF, okay, and other multilateral agencies, that if an economy is in crisis, then you need not less than 11 months cover, which means 5.9 months cover as at today, based on data for 16th of July, means Nigeria is half the cover of what is required for an economy that is in trouble. And why do I say the economy is strong? Because recovery, if we are not careful, is going to tank. And why do I say it's going to tank? Because we started growing, we had expectations of growth at, in fact, above 2% this year, when we were looking at this as at April, May, and of course, June. So we said this will happen on the back of a recovering global economy. If the global economy recovers, that means also the demand for hydrocarbons will rise. But if you look at the interplay of what is happening in the global market, before the latest agreement by OPEC Plus, burning light went as high as $75 per barrel. But as at this morning, when I checked, burning light has dropped to $68 per barrel. That means a shaving of $7 in a matter of 2 days, okay, on the price per barrel of Nigeria's premium crude, burning light. So now, if we take that, yes, there's an expectation that our production may go to 1.82 million barrels per day, from 1.4 before the OPEC Plus agreement. So it then means, yes, Nigeria has prospects of any more from crude oil. But the other side of the divide, which is the real worrisome there, is the fact that there are 2 major things playing out here for Nigeria. Number one is what to earn, which is largely driven by your hydrocarbons, that is crude oil, condensate, associated gas. On the other hand, you also export non-oil goods. I'm happy you made reference to the, EFFP, the provision of $60 billion to incentivize, export, especially to ECOWAS. That's good. But again, to what extent will that drive very quickly the export earnings from non-air goods and services? That has a bit of, we need to exercise a bit of caution there. Now, the other side of the pendulum is whenever there's a gap in your external sector, the expectation is that foreign investors will bridge the gap. So the question again is, what are we doing today to inspire confidence in those foreign investors for them to come to invest here? We know what happened in 2020 by the data available. Most portfolio investors left Nigeria, okay? More or less, I use the word evaporated. So if we are going to get foreign investors to come and bring this gap in our external sector, it means we have to do things that will inspire investor confidence. So the question is, what are those things? For me, as an analyst, the major issue for Nigeria today is security. And until we inspire confidence of not only producers here, and then investors, domestic and foreign, with respect to what we do on security, we may not get the kind of traction we require to bring this economy to grow the way we said at the beginning of the year.
Moving on, access to credit remains very important for small businesses, and we also need to look at the impact of the Finance Act on the business climate. At least this is the second year we've had the Finance Act with our budget, vis-a-vis waivers for manufacturers and local production. I think we have a lot to grapple with. Dr. Adedikpe, how do you see us tallying all of these reports and actualizing or getting this inclusive growth that we talk about?
Thank you so very much. Very important issue you raised there. I think there are two things basically that we must come to terms with. One is the importance of the informal sector, and of course the micro, small and medium scale enterprises. Okay. Now, they dominate our economy in terms of size and number. In terms of contribution to GDP, also very important, about 14% of our GDP comes from them. So now, if you look at the industrial sector, in terms of jobs, 50% of jobs there are from the SMEs. If we talk about the number of manufacturing entities, we'll be talking about 91% of them being SMEs. So the question for us is, that is the space where we need to give more attention to, in terms of not only financial inclusiveness, but also growing the economy inclusively. So you talked about access to credit, and I want to give credit to the Nigerian banking system. Our banks have done very well in terms of driving access to credit, especially if you look at where we were in 2020 and where we are today, in terms of the way they leverage technology, in terms of how they also make it convenient for people to access funds, the kind of product they introduced. All of those are good coming from the banking sector. But what do we expect the government to complement with? And that is looking at the Finance Act. Yes, there are some provisions there that kind of give some, incentive to small enterprises. But the question, big question today, is that if we truly want inclusive growth, then our focus must be more at the bottom of the pyramid. Now, that is, when you look at the bottom of the pyramid, it talks about the poverty rate, of course, 41.1% based on the latest survey carried out by the National Bureau of Statistics. But the real issue here is that if we want to intervene successfully at the bottom of the pyramid and grow our economy inclusively, the Central Bank of Nigeria and the federal government of Nigeria cannot afford to ignore the microfinance banks, okay, because that is where they intervene. That is where they operate. You look at the millions of customers that operators in that sector have on their books today. These are companies and individuals that we can rapidly grow their businesses inclusively by giving them access to finance. So there are three things there that must happen. One is access to the fund, and of course, availability is also important, which means intervention funds by the government and the central bank. We must come to the reality that a good portion of this should be driven through the microfinance sector. There are a number of brands there that are doing very well, okay? So even if you say you can intervene through the entire 894 of them, as of today, okay, there are some that have a track record of performance that you can actually engage and intervene through them. Until we come to terms with that, all that we have in the Finance Act and all the intervention that we talk about with banding numbers all around will amount to nothing. because that is where the real issue lies. If we want to grow the economy inclusively, the nano enterprises, that's the one-man business, the micro, the small and medium-scale enterprises. Until we seriously intervene within that space, we may not grow our economy inclusively.
Wrapping up this discussion now, Dr. Adedipe, let's touch on infrastructure development, which is key. And we know that our budget size cannot sustain the kind of growth or the kind of what we intend to achieve. We can't use this budget, and that's why we're looking at PPPs and other moves by government to be able to straighten this up. What more do you expect? And as even the Delta variant is also a threat on one side.
Now, I will put it simply this way, because I've been privileged to be a part of different studies, looking at relationship between infrastructure and sovereign debt, looking at infrastructure and growth of the economy, even now looking at countries we can say are models in terms of infrastructure development and what lessons we can take from them. You see, developing infrastructure is not rocket science. It's about what have other nations that are top in that. There's a table that we call infrastructure index, and we look at the top 10, the top 20. Why are they there? Just look at what has happened within the space of telecoms. Okay, look at internet penetration, look at tele density in Nigeria, put that side by side by how many Nigerians have access to the internet. Okay, access to internet, we are number 6 in the world today. Because we have over 120 million Nigerians that have access to the internet. But when you talk about internet penetration, we don't show up there because we are at 46% thereabout. In fact, 46.6% in terms of internet penetration. When you talk about tele density, we are at about 107.14%. Okay, in terms of tele density, that is how many people have access to telephony services compared to our population. Okay, all of those are good in telecoms. I just checked out some data this morning. Where were we in year 2000 in those 3 areas? And where are we today in 2021? At least let's say as at first quarter of this year. So now, can't we replicate the same when it comes to infrastructure development? Now, if we really want to get it right, government must accept the reality, which is all over the world, not just in Nigeria, that government cannot find sufficient resources to deliver the infrastructure we require. I've been a part of this conversation for close to 16 years now. We're talking about infrastructure development in Nigeria under different fora and umbrella. The bottom line of it, looking at what is happening all around the world, is government must come to that reality. They can never find enough resources. Even if they borrow 10 times where we are today, it still cannot be enough to deliver the infrastructure needs and bridge the gap. So they must come to terms with the reality that if we want value for money and also want world-class quality in terms of infrastructure and also get it to be funded efficiently, government should look the way of the private sector. That is my take on this. We can just do what China did in 2004. I've said it repeatedly to our different governments since 2008. What China did simply in 2004 was to design a 30-year infrastructure plan. We want to build expressways, 85,000 kilometers in 30 years. We want to build the longest stretch of railway in the world by year 2012. We want to also have the largest number of netizens and now outperform South Korea, which was the leader globally then. But of course, as of today, this morning, China is ahead of everybody when it comes to internet access and the rest of it. Okay? So in which case, you have to be clear about your goals, number one. And then the second thing is execution. When it comes to execution, it cannot be government alone. So, and of course, when issues like this are discussed, government should not wave it off. They should look at the issues we are bringing up and see what is useful and make good use of it. We are Nigerians. If the government gets it right, we are the beneficiaries. So we want them to get it right so that all of us can benefit. They must begin to see things from that perspective and not see when we criticize what they are doing or bring ideas that it is because we want to paint the government in the color that they don't want. We are Nigerians. We're all together in this and want things to be better.
Indeed, Chief Consultant B. Adedipe Associates Limited, Dr. Bioda Adedipe, thank you very much for spending your holiday with us to discuss all of these important issues. We appreciate this and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you so very much, and thanks for having me.
All right, there.